Hello, this is Ron Clark with the Bible Message Podcast. We're going to pick up in Genesis. Uh, we've gone up to chapter 23. We've seen where Abraham offers up Isaac in chapter 22 and basically commits his son that he's waited all his life for and wonders what God is going to do about it, just trusting God to work it out because of his promises. So he believes God is going to do that. And God's test just shows Abraham's faithfulness. And then Sarah dies in chapter 23. So he's separated not only from his family that he had left behind in the land of Paddan Aram, but he now is separated from his life partner. And through that, all of that, he trusts God. So a few principles to kind of keep in mind through all this is that God tests people in order to draw out of them what their faith is. God's desire is that their faith in him may be manifested, and men are responsible for their faith or lack of faith, and this is demonstrated clearly in their lives. So God brings tests, he brings pressure on us at times, so then we can show that we trust him. He gives enough information to guide decisions, and then he may give more information in his time to guide further decisions or to change something previously decided. And related to that, believers should trust God to give enough information to make a wise decision now in the situation we're in now. And if God does provide more information, the believer should trust that God's timing is right and considering further wise decisions or changes. God has his purposes for working things out like this, and we can lean on him day by day, year by year, and see what God is doing through it all. And if there's not enough information given to make a wise decision that honors the Lord, the believer can wait. Waiting is one of the toughest things we could do. And waiting is something that a wise, growing believer realizes that they should wait on the Lord if not enough information is given to be wise about something. Another principle is to realize that separation is a part of life, and a lot of times this is just simply a consequence of sin's entry into the world and the human race. Separations also may be the result of personal sins or foolish choices. You remember when Abraham and Lot separated? Lot made some foolish choices there, but Abraham was wise. And there are some separations that can bring about good. So Abraham obeyed God's call and promise to leave his family and separate. And God may call you to separate for good reasons. But separation to God's will and way honors him, and sometimes we separate from evil and from things that are otherwise good, but we could get entangled in them so much that it's wiser to set them aside. So those kinds of separations are sometimes tough because we have to deal with maybe our own sin, maybe a sin of someone else, maybe a foolishness, or maybe something that the society accepts or allows or even promotes. And by separating from it, it can incur reactions from other people. But that honors God by pointing out what someone who trusts the true God and using his principles will do and will show what's true and right and what's better. So separation is part of life and something that we need to be aware of. So in applying this, give your best to the Lord like Abraham gave Isaac. if you lose a child in death, it's terrible. Find comfort in giving to the Lord in some way. If you lose a child or a family member or a friend because they turn away from the Lord or they turn away from you, commit that to the Lord too. Examine if you have responsibility in that kind of separation, but um, it's sad when those things happen. But commit yourself to the Lord and draw from Him the comfort that He can give in that kind of grief, that kind of pain of loss and separation. Because He understands that. I mean, He has a whole humanity, the majority of which has turned away from Him. So He knows about that kind of stuff too. So dedicate the best that you have, however little or great you think it might be. Just commit yourself to the Lord. Romans 12, 1 and 2 talks about making that kind of a commitment, and that we would be transformed by the renewing of our mind. That is, taking God's principles to make them our mindset, the way we think. So then we think about things the way God would, so that it honors Him. It's ours too, but it's reflecting the true God and Himself. So just think about what your heart is tied to or set on. And all of us have these things, and we tie our hearts to things, and some of them are good. We need to submit all of them to God. And at each stage of life, examine your physical strength, your family situation, your job, or your position that you have. You may have worked hard a long time to get the position you have. What your interests are, the group you're friends with, and then the church you attend, all of them. There is repeated testing and changes and God's wisdom to be applying. And I just encourage you with this podcast about applying these principles from the life of Abraham and his faithfulness all through life. He was faithful. And you and I can follow that example. In some way, the Lord will guide and will provide what's needed for your life to be a testimony for Him and to have lasting blessing on others, and that the Lord will reward when this life is over. So I just encourage you to think about this. Remember, Abraham was given tremendous promises. The only one he really received in his life, other than the wealth and the reputation that he had, was his son Isaac. And that in Isaac, the blessings would be given. He understood some things about it, that his descendants for hundreds of years ahead, but he didn't know how that all would work out in many of its details. But the ultimate one was, you will be a blessing, Abraham, to all nations. And that would be through the promised Redeemer that will come through your family and your nation, through Israel. That would be 2,000 years later. That's a long time to wait. But God fulfills His promises in His time and way. And we have great and precious promises, just like Peter says in 2 Peter 1, I think it is. He will fulfill them in His time and way. Some now, most of them later, but some wonderful things even now. Trust God, even through the failures, through the fulfillments, through the tests, and through the losses. And we're going to continue to see how Abraham trusts God through decisions in life in our next podcast. So God bless you. Thank you for joining me.